So we got another fight to break down, a request from a subscriber, which we do appreciate. And this is a good one. This to me feels like a fight that actually will happen at some point. It's Jack Della Maddalena versus Shavkat Rakhmonov, a fight that would likely be for a #1 contender's spot at welterweight, or potentially when one of these two guys has the title, could be a title fight someday.
Right.
Now, a couple of things stick out to me. One, Jack just showed us against Gilbert Burns that he's got tremendous resilience. He was losing that fight up until the point that he wasn't, and he got the finish. He also showed some incredible boxing. Shavkat Rakhmonov on the other side has been a perfect fighter. 100% finish rate, never lost a fight.
Insane.
A perfect balance almost of submissions and knockouts. The guy can literally do it all. Now, the couple of things that I think are interesting talking points here when you look at the X's and O's. Shavkat Rakhmonov, if there is one point of criticism, he doesn't move his head a whole lot, as we saw in the Jeff Neal fight, and Jack is very good about creating angles and landing some crisp boxing.
Right.
On the other side, we have to be a little bit fair here as far as Shavkat is concerned. Jack Della Maddalena is not the most difficult guy in the world to get to the ground, and Shavkat Rakhmonov is one of the best at getting you to the ground, which is where he really excels.
Right.
So how would you see this one playing out, and what are some X's and O's you think that we should look out for if this fight happens?
I love this matchup, and I think for sure we will see this fight happen. And it's going to happen one of two ways. Either it's on the rise to the title, or it's when one of them is the title holder, because both of them have these beautiful records, and Shavkat looks so good. On any given night, Shavkat Rakhmonov could be the world champion of 170. And in my opinion, Jack Della Maddalena beating Gilbert Burns put him in the discussion. Now he belongs in the mix. I don't know if on any given night he could be the world champion, but he's certainly at the table now, where Shavkat Rakhmonov hasn't looked bad one bit yet. I mean, of course, you know, the head movement was a little bit of an issue against Jeff Neal, and I would have liked to seen a little bit more of that, but how can you criticize a guy that went out there and got the job done in finishing fashion like he always does? But it does make for a very interesting matchup, because we saw Jack Della Maddalena go out there and look really crisp with his boxing. I know Gilbert Burns was winning that fight, and he was doing all the things he needed to do to get the fight to the ground, to steal rounds away from the young man, and to ultimately get his hand raised until he got cracked in the third round and then, of course, lost the fight. But Jack Della Maddalena was putting together some really nice combos, and that was part of the urgency that made Gilbert Burns take him to the ground and keep him there, where he's a black belt. He's very decorated in the grappling realm and knew that he could have the advantage on the young man. Of course, he tried to reshoot when they had that little scramble, and that's what got him caught. I am very interested in seeing how these two would pair up, because Shavkat Rakhmonov looks perfect, right? If he takes you to the ground, he's going to submit you. And if you stay on the feet, he's going to knock you out or TKO you. And I think Jack Della Maddalena has answered a lot of questions for us, but he still has a few more to answer for us, because it did look like there was a bit of a skill difference between the groundwork that Gilbert Burns was doing and the defense that Jack was able to show us. And I think Gilbert Burns and Shavkat are basically both submission threats to the highest of level at 170.
Yes.
And if Jack isn't able to get Gilbert Burns off him, I don't really know if he's going to be able to get Shavkat off him. And one careless mistake out of Gilbert Burns cost him that fight. I haven't seen Shavkat Rakhmonov make a careless mistake yet in his career. Maybe early on, before he made it to the UFC, he had zigged when he should have zagged and didn't look as perfect as he did in the UFC. But as of right now, he really doesn't veer off from the game plan. He really doesn't do anything other than go out there and inflict damage and do exactly what him and his team and his corner intend to do, which is go beat you up in every realm. They're kind of willing to flow wherever the fight goes, right? This is mixed martial arts. So if you want to box, okay, we'll box a little bit, but then we wind up in kicking range and I'm going to start kicking you. And then eventually we're going to tie up against the cage. Here's some clinch work for you. It looks really good. When Shavkat does any of it, he's always looking like the more experienced, more skilled fighter in whatever realm the fight goes. And that's why I think Jack Della Maddalena not being as complete of a fighter as Shavkat is what would be the sort of reason for him being the underdog. And I do believe he would be the underdog in that fight.
Yeah.
And I think Shavkat Rakhmonov is just so lethal everywhere. And honestly, with the 100% finishing rate, how can you say anything other than that? That Jack would have to come up with a little bit more creative of a game plan than standing in there and doing some really crisp boxing, Don't get me wrong, his boxing is high level. Like in MMA, we're not seeing guys throw hands like that, especially 170 and above. These heavier weight classes aren't throwing that solid of combinations. They're not that poised and not that balanced with their footwork and everything like that. Jack looks real sharp doing it. I just don't know if he's ready to take on a guy like Shavkat and beat him.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. And my early prediction for this fight, if it is to materialize, is that Shavkat will get his hand raised. But that's not without risk. I mean, this is a risky fight for Shavkat. And you mentioned Jack Della Maddalena's boxing. Another interesting fact about Jack Della Maddalena is his resilience was, I mentioned it being shown in the Gilbert Burns fight, but he actually lost the first 2 fights of his pro MMA career.
Wow.
So he started his career 0-2. He's like 17-2 now. So
Mentally
he's undefeated since his first 2 fights.
Wow.
A lot of guys, I mean, how many of them on the local circuit do you see, people that we know personally, that get their pro license and they go out there and take a crack at it, they lose a fight by submission or KO,
One and done.
They come back and they lose again. Most of them are like, you know what? I like training. This is fun. This isn't really for me. I don't think I'm going to make a career out of that. Jack Della Maddalena said, I'm not going to quit till I go on a 17-fight run and become the UFC champion. So it speaks to his character and it speaks to his resilience, but we have to talk about the boxing because that's the one area of Shavkat's game that I think Jack Della Maddalena could potentially expose.
Yeah.
Shavkat is very much right in front of you as a striker. He throws great long punches. He's tall for the division. He's got some great kicks and he's got some crazy power, but his head is there to be hit.
Yeah.
And Jack's very good about getting off angle, landing uncommon, unconventional combinations. He's not just going to throw a jab cross hook at you. He's going to do some things that are off time. He's going to feint. He's going to try to bait you. He's going to set some traps. And Shavkat's as good as any fighter on the UFC roster, but any fighter on the UFC, and so is Islam Makhachev. But we saw Islam Makhachev suffer a defeat by knockout in his career, and that's what Khabib talks about all the time. The one thing that, you know, you really can't train for is, Khabib calls it the lucky punch. I call it the perfect punch, the punch that's properly timed, that comes from the right angle, that you don't see coming, that takes you out of the game. So Jack certainly poses that threat. But when you look at an all-encompassing, you know, facet of this sport, Shavkat's more buttoned up head to toe.
Oh, yeah.
So my prediction would be that Shavkat would be able to win the fight because he would be able to pull that parachute if he needed to, if Jack starts having real success on the feet and get Jack down. I mean, Jack's takedown defense has really improved a lot, but we did see Gilbert Burns get him to the ground a few times. We did see Gilbert Burns accumulate rounds and do damage on the ground. And while Gilbert may be as good of a submission threat as Shavkat is, or perhaps even better, Shavkat is better, in my opinion, on positional grappling.
Yeah.
Keeping top position, holding you in half guard, you know, taking mount, doing damage, and ultimately looking for that sub. But he takes his time. He's not, as you said, he'll go wherever the fight takes him, and he's not looking to force anything.
Right.
But when he sees his opportunity, he's going to take it, and he's not going to let you up from it. Once you give your legs away to Shavkat Rakhmonov, you're not going to shrimp out and recover your guard. Either you're going to be finished or the round is going to end. Once he takes an arm, you're not getting it back. Either you're going to be finished or the round is going to end. And that's the way Shavkat is as a fighter. He systematically makes things worse and worse and worse for you until he gets you out of there. And every time he's been in there, he's gotten his opponent out of there.
Yeah, and I don't even think that there's an issue with Shavkat's boxing. I would say it's more on the defensive side, right? He doesn't move his head all that much, but at the same time, he's got a chin on him. And he moves forward. He doesn't really take steps back. He's very calculated, and the really beautiful thing about Shavkat's game is the fact that he goes where the fight goes. And it's like, okay, out of the frying pan into the fire with him. You're like, all right, well, I don't know. I don't really like kickboxing range with him, so let's box with him. And then he starts putting some big shots on you as well. And even though you might be landing on the big guy, you're not doing all that much damage, and it doesn't seem like he's going anywhere. We haven't really seen him do the chicken dance or get wobbled in a fight. We've just seen him, you know, take a little bit of damage and walk right through it like a juggernaut. So I think that the keys to victory for Shavkat are take the fight wherever you want it. And if Jack is adamant on keeping it boxing, yeah, it might be a little bit more difficult of a night for you, but you can still get the job done. I just think that Jack Della Maddalena showed us that his grappling defense is lacking, just like Shavkat's boxing defense is lacking. And if Shavkat can sniff that out and they wind up in close range, which is what boxing is, right? Boxing is one step closer than kickboxing range. then you're talking about one half step closer and you're in grappling range. And Jack's got to play this very fine line of, I don't want to stand and kick with this guy because his kicks are really solid and he's really big for the division. He's also decent at using his range. And I don't want to get in the tie clinch or in the grappling realm with this guy. So I got to keep it boxing, but that's a very risky red zone.
Close, but not too close.
Right, yeah. Keep him at bay, but you also have to land your shots. And Shavkat's bigger than and taller than almost everybody at 170. Jack is a good frame for 170. I don't really see Jack's career moving up to 85 like I could see Shavkat's moving to 85.
He's a true welterweight.
Yeah, and he looks great doing it. And I will speak to the boxing quickly, what you were saying about him. He does make great adjustments. He's able to take finite little angles that you probably, to the viewer's eyes, you don't even really notice it. But if you're watching Jack, his ability to create a small angle. A lot of coaches and people in the world of MMA, they like to say, create the angle, and somebody thinks it has to be a 45-degree angle to make something happen. It can be 5 degrees, and that can make all the difference in the world. That can change the perception and the depth and the range and everything of your opponent, and you can land shots that they didn't even realize they were in range for. And Jack seems to be a master at that. And not only is he good at fighting out of his traditional stance, but he showed us that he can switch stances pretty well, and that causes a lot of confusion for somebody who gets hit a lot in the boxing realm. Shavkat would have to really be on his P's and Q's with the boxing realm. But again, like I said, kickboxing range is just outside of it and grappling range is just outside of it. So Jack Della Maddalena has to sit right dead smack in the middle of that if he wants his best chance at winning, which would be pure boxing with Shavkat. And like I said, Shavkat will close the distance on you. He's not going to not take a takedown if it's sitting in front of his face, but he's also not going to try to force it. And that's part of what makes him so dangerous. If you go against a guy with the last name Nurmagomedov, you know after about the first 30 seconds to watch out for the takedown because it's coming. With Shavkat, he'll stand and strike with you. And if he has to use his grappling, or if you wind up getting close to the bear, then of course you're going to get taken down, or you're going to get drugged to the ground, or you're going to get put up against the fence. But he's not forcing anything. And I think that's one of his secret weapons that makes him very dangerous.
Very well said.